In the New Mexico Territory of 1878, law was a whisper and survival was a scream. For the widow Maeve O'Connell, it was the silence that was killing her. 2 husbands in the ground, 0 children to carry the name, and a ranch, the mighty Lazy O, sprawling for thousands of acres, was about to die right alongside her. She stood on the porch of her grand, weather-beaten house, staring not at the cattle, not at the land, but at the terrifying emptiness. She needed an heir. She needed a future. And to get it, she was about to make a deal that would shatter every rule and set the whole territory on fire. Maeve was forged in prairie fires and hardened by loss. Her first husband, Robert, was lost to a Comanche raid a decade ago. Her second, Thomas, was taken by a rattlesnake just 3 years back. Both good men, both strong, and both, tragically, had left her womb as barren as the desert plains. At 38, her fiery red hair was shot through with silver, her hands calloused from work, and her green eyes held the sharp, assessing gaze of a woman who expected nothing and was prepared for anything. The Lazy O was a titan of a ranch, thousands of cattle, a loyal crew of cowboys, and a foreman, Jebediah, who'd been with her family for 20 years. Jeb was always telling her to find a third husband, a good man to keep her company. "Company ain't what I need, Jeb," she'd snap back, her jaw tight. "I need an heir." Jeb would just nod. He knew the truth. After 2 childless marriages, the gossips in the nearby town of Redemption had their knives out. They said she was cursed. They whispered she was broken. The whispers stung, but they also lit a fire in her. This ranch, this legacy, would not die with her. It couldn't. The town of Redemption offered no solutions, just drifters and gamblers who were more interested in her land than her hand. She'd entertained a few suitors. There was Bart Grumman, a fat merchant from Santa Fe with sweaty palms and even sweatier ambitions. Then came Smiling Jack Dawson, a handsome cowboy whose smile never quite reached his eyes, which were always fixed on her account books. She sent them all packing, but time was a cruel marching army. Every new moon was a reminder of her fading chances. She tried herbal remedies from the local Apache women. She even buried a lock of her hair under a full moon, a strange ritual whispered to her by a traveling mystic. Nothing worked. Nothing. One blistering afternoon, sitting at her father's massive oak desk, she stared at the faded photos of her family, strong pioneers who built this empire from dust and grit. The pressure was unbearable. And then it hit her, a realization as sharp and clear as a shard of glass. The conventional path had failed her. A husband hadn't given her what she needed. She didn't need a partner to love and cherish. She needed a man for a single biological purpose. The thought was scandalous. It sent a shiver of shame down her spine. But as the sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in fire and blood, the shame burned away. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She was a woman of the West, a survivor. Conventions were for people who had other options. She needed a man to plant a seed. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she would find him. Even if she had to look in the darkest, most forbidden corners of the world. The moment Maeve started asking around for a strong, quiet man for a special task, the rumor mill in Redemption kicked into high gear. "Heard the widow O'Connell's looking for a new foreman," a grizzled cowboy named Buck drawled over cards at the Rusty Spur Saloon. His friend Hank chuckled, a dark, knowing sound. "Foreman, you say? I heard tell she's looking for something a bit more personal. That woman's been barren as a dried-up creek bed. Maybe she's finally given up on love and decided to get practical." The men snickered. Maeve's reputation as a fierce, independent woman made her a target for their crude jokes, but she didn't care about their whispers. Her mission was clear. She needed a man who was healthy, discreet, and most importantly, an outsider. Someone who wouldn't stick around to gossip or make claims. He had to be a ghost, someone to do a job and disappear. She started asking traveling traders, freight drivers, anyone who passed through the Lazy O. "Seen any good men looking for work? Someone quiet, who keeps to himself." The men they described were rough, drifters, prospectors, men running from the law. None of them fit her clinical criteria. This was a transaction, not a romance. She needed a man who wouldn't challenge her authority, who wouldn't expect anything more than payment. Then, one dusty afternoon, a small, wizened Ute trader named Old Man Shaman arrived. He was known for knowing the secrets of the land and its people. After they finished their business, Maeve took a deep breath and laid her cards on the table. Old man shaman, she began, her voice low. I need a man for a particular purpose. A strong man, healthy, discreet. She hesitated, then plunged ahead. Someone who can give me a child. Old man shaman's ancient eyes looked at her, holding no judgment. He had seen everything in his long life, and a woman's desperation was a familiar language. He puffed on his pipe for a long moment, the scent of burning sage mixing with the dust. There is a man, he finally said, his voice a raspy whisper. Lives in the canyon lands to the east. A quiet one. His people call him Silent Arrow. Maeve's breath caught in her throat. He is Apache, the old man continued, but not of the war bands. He walks alone. He is strong. He is lonely. An Apache. The idea was a lightning strike. It was radical, unthinkable. The hatred between settlers and the Apache ran as deep as the canyons themselves, carved by years of blood and conflict. But the old man's words hung in the air. An Apache would be the ultimate outsider. His presence would raise questions, but in the long run, it was less complicated than a white man who might get ideas. And the word lonely, it suggested a man who might understand an unusual arrangement. Silent Arrow, Maeve repeated, the name feeling strange and powerful on her tongue. What kind of man is he? The old Ute exhaled a cloud of smoke. A man of few words but deep thoughts. A hunter, a tracker. His family was taken by the sickness years ago. He lives apart even from his own kind. He is a good man, for all that the white men fear his kind. He desires only peace, and perhaps a connection. Hope, a feeling she thought had died, flickered inside her. Can you bring him to me? She asked. Or tell him I seek him? The old man nodded slowly. I will speak to him. He will decide. He respects the ways of the land and the needs of a woman who seeks to honor her ancestors. Old man shaman left, and Maeve was alone with the sheer, terrifying weight of her decision. An Apache. The town would be scandalized. Her own ranch hands might revolt, but the land, the legacy, it whispered louder than any of their voices. A week later, just as she was starting to think he wouldn't come, old man shaman returned. He was alone. He will come, the Ute said simply. He respects your courage, Maeve O'Connell. He will meet you at the old trading post, 2 days from now, at sundown. Maeve's heart hammered in her chest. The deal was about to be made. The old trading post was a skeleton of a building, a crumbling monument to a forgotten time. Maeve arrived at sundown, her Winchester rifle across her saddle. She was alone. She had to show she wasn't afraid. The air grew cold, and then, like a ghost conjured from the shadows, he appeared. He moved with a silent grace that made him seem part of the land itself. He was taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders and a lean, powerful build. His long, dark hair was tied back, and his face was all sharp angles and quiet intensity. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were dark as obsidian, holding a depth that both fascinated and terrified her. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much and said too little. This was Silent Arrow. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hands loose at his sides. He was unarmed, save for a large hunting knife at his hip. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. You are Silent Arrow, Maeve said, her voice a little rough. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. No words. Old man shaman told me about you, she continued, choosing her words like stepping stones across a raging river. He said you were a man of honor. Another nod. Still silence. Maeve realized his silence wasn't just a habit, it was who he was. I have a proposition for you, she said, meeting his gaze. A difficult one. I am Maeve O'Connell. The Lazy O Ranch is mine, but I have no heir, no child to carry on the name. Her voice trembled with a raw emotion she couldn't hide. My 2 husbands, they gave me no children. Time is running out. She took a deep breath. I do not seek a husband. I seek a father for my child, a man to plant a seed deep and steady in me. The words hung in the twilight air, stark and brutal. She watched his face for any sign of shock or disgust or amusement. There was nothing. His face was a stone mask. I would pay you, Maeve pressed on, needing to fill the vast silence. generously, gold, whatever you need. And once a child is conceived, you would be free to go. No obligations, no claims. The child would be mine, raised as an O'Connell. Your part would be done. The silence stretched on, broken only by the chirping of crickets. Her heart was a drum against her ribs. Had she made a terrible mistake? Was this proposal too insane even for a man who walked alone? Finally, after an eternity, he spoke. His voice was a low rumble, like stones shifting deep in the earth. His English was clear, though accented. "Why me?" he asked, his gaze never leaving hers. "There are many men among your people. Strong men." Maeve met his gaze without flinching. "Because I need a man who is discreet, a man who will not try to claim my land or my name. And you are an outsider. Your presence would be less complicated." She added a truth she hadn't planned on. "An old man shaman said you were lonely. Perhaps you also seek a connection, however fleeting." His dark eyes seemed to see right through her, into the desperate, lonely corners of her soul. He stood there, weighing her words, weighing her. The fate of her entire legacy hung on his decision. Then he nodded. A slow, deliberate movement. "I understand the need for legacy," he said. "My people, we seek to continue, to survive." He paused, and his gaze softened just a fraction. "I will do this, for the child, for the spirit of the land." Relief washed over Maeve so powerfully her knees nearly buckled. She had done it. She had found him. The silent Apache had agreed to her impossible bargain. But the real challenge, the real danger, was only just beginning. The arrangement was stranger than anything the Lazy O had ever seen. Silent Arrow arrived a few days later with nothing but a sturdy Mustang and a worn saddlebag. Maeve told Jebediah to put him in the small, isolated cabin at the far edge of the ranch. "He's a tracker," Maeve said, her voice firm, cutting off any questions. "Good with cattle, knows the land. Keep him busy, but let him keep to himself." Jebediah grunted, but he cast a wary eye at the silent, intense Apache. The other ranch hands kept their distance. An Apache on a white woman's ranch was strange enough. What they didn't know would have sent them running for the hills. Maeve set aside a private room in the main house. In the evenings, away from prying eyes, they would meet. The first few times were painfully awkward. The silence in the room was a heavy blanket. Maeve, for all her strength, felt vulnerable. She hadn't been with a man in years, and the cold, clinical nature of their deal made it even harder. But she would close her eyes and think of the legacy, of the future of the Lazy O. Silent Arrow was a surprise. He was respectful, never forceful. He seemed to understand the gravity of her sacrifice. There were no gentle words, no whispers of affection, just a silent, shared understanding of their mission. He moved with an innate grace, and his hands, though calloused from a life in the wild, were surprisingly gentle. Maeve found herself watching him, not just as a means to an end, but as a man. She saw a quiet strength that had nothing to do with muscle. He was a man of deep, quiet resolve. Days turned into weeks. The ranch hummed with its usual rhythm. But there was a new element. Silent Arrow proved to be more than just a party to their secret agreement. He was an incredible asset. He could track lost cattle over solid rock. He could find hidden springs of water just by watching the birds. He could predict the weather with an accuracy that left Jebediah speechless. He moved through the land like a ghost, a part of it. The cowboys, who were at first suspicious, slowly began to respect his skill. They didn't understand him, but they respected what he could do. Maeve felt herself being drawn to his quiet presence. It wasn't love, not like she'd known with her husbands. This was something different, something deeper, more primal. He never asked her about her past. He never questioned her motives. He simply existed, a quiet force of nature, patiently working towards their shared goal. One evening, after one of their silent encounters, Maeve lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She realized that the desperation that had driven her was slowly being replaced by a strange sense of peace. She started noticing the small things: a freshly caught rabbit left on her porch, a cluster of wild berries placed on her windowsill, silent offerings. His dark eyes, when they met hers across the dinner table, held a flicker of something she couldn't name. Compassion, maybe. Or perhaps a shared solitude. Their conversations, though still rare, began to change. One night, she found herself asking him, "What do you do out there in the canyons when you're alone?" He considered the question for a long time. "I watch," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I learn. I listen to the wind. The spirits speak in the wind." Maeve had always been a practical woman, but hearing him say it with such simple conviction made her listen. "What do they say?" she asked softly. "They speak of balance," he replied, "of life and death, of the circle that never ends. They speak of continuation." His words struck her like a physical blow. Continuation. That was the very thing she was fighting for, risking everything for. They were both, in their own separate ways, seeking the same thing. Weeks turned into months. The autumn winds began to whisper through the cottonwoods. Maeve started noticing changes in her body. A faint nausea in the morning. A deep tiredness that had nothing to do with ranch work. Hope, fragile but persistent, began to bloom inside her. One chilly morning, she stumbled to her window, feeling a wave of sickness. She saw Silent Arrow outside, riding towards the hills. He paused on the crest of a ridge, a solitary figure silhouetted against the rising sun. He just stood there for a long moment, communing with the vast, silent land. And in that moment, a profound realization washed over Maeve. This quiet, lonely Apache hadn't just planted a seed in her womb. Without either of them realizing it, he had planted a seed in her soul, a seed of respect, an unexpected connection, an understanding that went beyond words and skin color. The child, if it came, would be more than just an heir. It would be a bridge between two worlds. And Maeve knew, with a terrifying certainty, that bridge would be built over a river of fire. The change in Maeve O'Connell was undeniable. Her iron will softened. Her movements became slower, more deliberate. There was a new light in her emerald eyes. Jebediah saw it first. He noticed the slight rounding of her belly, the way she now turned her nose up at the strong coffee she once loved. He said nothing, but a knowing look entered his old eyes. The whispers in redemption, however, soon became a roar. It started with Miss Agnes at the general store. She noticed Maeve buying bolts of fine linen, enough for a baby's layette. Her tongue, sharper than a cactus spine, started wagging. "The widow O'Connell is with child," she declared to anyone who would listen. "But who's the father? She ain't been courting no one from around here." The truth, when it finally slithered out, was more shocking than any of them could have imagined. The quiet Apache tracker at the Lazy O Maeve's obvious condition. The pieces clicked together in a way that defied every rule of their society. "It's the Apache!" hissed Josiah Miller, the owner of the general store, his face twisted in disgust. "The widow O'Connell has shamed herself, laying with a savage." The outrage was a wildfire. In these frontier towns, racial hatred was a religion. The idea of a prominent white woman bearing a child by an Apache man wasn't just scandalous. It was a declaration of war, a betrayal of their entire way of life. The threats started immediately. Crude messages were nailed to the fence posts of the Lazy O. "Half-breed abomination! Burn the witch and her savage!" One night, a volley of rifle shots shattered a window in Maeve's parlor. Maeve was scared, but she refused to break. Their hatred only hardened her resolve. She had made her choice. She would protect her child and the father of her child with every last breath in her body. "They're scared, Maeve," Jebediah told her, his face grim as he boarded up the broken window. "Scared of what they don't understand. Scared of anything that ain't their own kind." Silent Arrow said little about the threats, but Maeve saw the change in him. His gaze was sharper, his movements more coiled. He started patrolling the ranch perimeter, his rifle always in his hand. He was protecting them in his own silent way. He even built a complex warning system of tripwires and bells around the main house. One afternoon, a delegation from Redemption rode up to the ranch. It was led by Reverend Albright, a man whose piety was as thin as his lips, flanked by Josiah Miller and a handful of other self-righteous townsmen. Maeve met them on the porch, her hand resting protectively on her swelling belly. "Maeve O'Connell," the Reverend began, his voice dripping with venom, "this community will not abide such a blatant act of sin. To consort with a heathen savage, to bring a half-breed into this world, is an affront to God and decent society. Maeve's eyes flashed with green fire. My body is my own, Reverend. My choices are my own, and my child will be an O'Connell, raised on this land, regardless of your narrow-minded judgments. Josiah Miller stepped forward, his face red with rage. You'll be an outcast, Maeve! We'll boycott your ranch! We'll run that Apache off and you with him! Just then, a shadow detached itself from the porch. It was Silent Arrow. His rifle was held casually in his hands, but its presence was a thunderclap. He stood beside Maeve, a silent, formidable wall. His dark eyes met the townsman's, calm but unyielding, radiating a threat more powerful than any shout. The delegation faltered. Their bluster evaporated in the face of his quiet strength. They were used to bullying women, not confronting a man who looked like he was carved from the mountains themselves. This is not over, Reverend Albright sputtered, unnerved. They retreated, their righteous anger suddenly tasting like fear. As they rode away, Maeve turned to Silent Arrow, a fierce pride swelling in her chest. Thank you, she said softly. He just nodded, his eyes already scanning the horizon, ever watchful. The war was far from over. But now, she wasn't fighting it alone. The final months were a siege. Supplies to the Lazy O were tampered with. Fences were cut in the dead of night. A fire was set near the stables, quickly extinguished by the ever-vigilant Silent Arrow and Jebediah. Maeve stayed inside the ranch house, a queen in her fortress, protected by her loyal men and the silent Apache who now moved like her own shadow. He anticipated her needs, bringing her cool water, building fires against the growing chill. He still spoke little, but his actions were a constant declaration of his dedication. He was committed to her and to the promise of their child. As her belly grew impossibly round, Maeve found herself talking to him, really talking, sharing her fears, her hopes. She told him about her parents, about the history of the ranch, about her dreams for the child. He listened, his obsidian eyes reflecting a deep, quiet understanding. And sometimes, he would share parts of his world, stories of Apache spirits, of the wisdom of the land. In the crucible of their shared isolation, the barriers between them melted away. They were no longer a man and a woman in a business deal. They were partners, bound together by a life-altering purpose. One stormy night, as the wind howled like a demon, the first sharp pains of labor hit her. Jebediah sent a rider for the midwife Martha, a full day's ride away. Silent Arrow's stoic mask finally cracked. Maeve saw a flicker of raw concern in his eyes. He stayed by her side, his strong hand a steady anchor as the waves of pain crashed over her. He built a roaring fire. He brought her warm compresses. He was a silent, steady rock in the storm. Martha, the midwife, finally arrived near dawn, her face grim from the treacherous ride. She took one look at the situation and shooed Silent Arrow out of the room, but he remained right outside the door, a sentinel on guard. The labor was brutal. It pushed Maeve to the very edge of her endurance. The storm outside seemed to mirror the tempest inside her body. She screamed, she pushed, she fought with every ounce of her being, and then, after an eternity of agony, a piercing cry split the air. "It's a boy, Maeve!" Martha declared, her voice thick with relief. "A strong, healthy boy!" Maeve, exhausted but triumphant, reached for her son. He was small, but perfect. A shock of dark hair, and eyes that were a startling mix of her green and his father's deep brown. A perfect blend of two worlds. Hearing the cry, Silent Arrow pushed the door open. His eyes, usually so unreadable, softened as he looked at the tiny bundle in Maeve's arms. He knelt beside the bed, a look of silent awe on his face. "He's beautiful," Maeve whispered, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. "Our son!" Silent Arrow reached out a tentative finger and gently touched the baby's cheek. "A child of the sun and the earth," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. It was one of the longest sentences he had ever spoken. They named him Ethan, Ethan O'Connell. The threats from redemption seemed to fade in the face of this new, vibrant life. Maeve held her son, a testament to her defiance, and knew he was the future. Silent Arrow remained at the ranch, no longer in the isolated cabin, but as a quiet, protective presence around Maeve and the baby. He would hold Ethan for hours, rocking him and singing soft Apache lullabies. Maeve watched them, her heart filled with a warmth she had never expected. He was supposed to leave. The contract was fulfilled, but he was no longer just the biological father. He was a guardian. One evening, as he held Ethan, Maeve sat beside him. "You said you would leave," she reminded him softly, a surprising ache in her voice. He looked from Ethan to Maeve, his dark eyes holding a universe of unspoken thoughts. "He is my son," he said simply. "My blood. He needs to know his heritage. Both sides." He paused, his gaze meeting hers, holding a silent, crucial question. "Unless you wish me to go." A lump formed in Maeve's throat. The desperation that started all this was gone. In its place was respect, affection, and a bond forged in fire and defiance. She looked at her son, then at the man who had given her this miracle. "No," she said, her voice firm and clear. "Stay, Silent Arrow, stay. This child needs his father." Then she added a truth that surprised even herself. "And I need my family." For the first time, a flicker of something that looked like a smile touched Silent Arrow's lips. It was a rare, breathtaking sight. He nodded, a silent acceptance of a future neither of them had ever dared to imagine. The Lazy O finally had its heir, and Maeve O'Connell's heart had finally found its home. The years that followed were a testament to their strange, powerful union. The Lazy O, once a place on the brink of extinction, became a crucible where a new kind of legacy was forged. Ethan grew from a baby into a spirited boy, a living, breathing bridge between two worlds. He had his mother's fiery red hair, but his father's dark, observant eyes that missed nothing. He was equally at home on the back of a horse, or moving like a whisper through the cottonwood groves. His education was as unique as his heritage. In the mornings, Maeve taught him numbers and letters, the language of contracts and cattle prices. She read him Shakespeare and the Bible, filling his mind with the stories of her world. "And O'Connell is never cheated," she'd say, her voice firm. In the afternoons, the vast ranch became his classroom, and Silent Arrow his teacher. He taught Ethan to read the land, to track a coyote, to find water, to listen to the whispers of the wind. Under the star-dusted desert sky, he told him the ancient Apache stories of creation, of the mountain spirits, and the trickster coyote. He taught his son that the earth was not a thing to be owned, but a living spirit to be respected. This dual upbringing created a boy of remarkable depth. The ranch hands, who once viewed his father with suspicion, now watched Ethan with a mixture of awe and pride. He could outride any of them, but he also had a quiet stillness, an ability to sense things they couldn't. "He's got your fire, Maeve," Jebediah, now old and bent, once remarked, "but he's got his daddy's soul. He sees the world in ways we can't." The town of Redemption, however, remained a festering sore of prejudice. The open threats had stopped, but the hostility simmered. When Maeve rode into town with Ethan, conversations would halt. People would stare. The other children, poisoned by their parents' hate, would taunt him. "Half-breed!" "Savage!" One afternoon, when Ethan was about 8, a group of older boys cornered him behind the general store. The ringleader was Josiah Miller's son. "Where's your war paint, Injun?" he sneered. Ethan stood his ground, his small fists clenched, his father's cold fire burning in his eyes. Before it could turn ugly, Maeve appeared, her face a thundercloud. "You will leave my son alone," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Miller's wife rushed out. "Your son has no place among decent folk, Maeve O'Connell. He's an unnatural thing." Maeve stepped so close their noses were almost touching. "My son," she whispered, her voice like ice, "is worth 10 of your sniveling brats. And if you or they ever lay a hand on him again, you will find out just how unnatural my wrath can be." The woman recoiled and the crowd scattered. But the incident left a scar on Ethan, a painful reminder that the world outside the Lazy O would always see him as something other, something less. The real turning point came 2 years later, during the most brutal winter on record. A blizzard the Apache called the White Death swept down from the mountains, burying the territory in snow. When the storm finally broke, Redemption was in a panic. Cattle had frozen to death. And worse, Josiah Miller's son, the same boy who had bullied Ethan, had wandered off and was now missing. A posse of grim-faced men searched for a full day, but returned frostbitten and defeated. The boy, they all agreed, was gone, swallowed by the unforgiving frontier. That evening, A frantic, humbled Josiah Miller rode to the Lazy-O. The arrogance was gone, stripped away by terror. "Maeve," he stammered, his voice breaking. "They've given up. They say there's no hope. But I heard stories about him." He gestured toward the barn, where a light burned. He was talking about Silent Arrow's tracking. Maeve looked at the man who had despised her family, and for a moment she felt a cold satisfaction. But then she saw the face of a terrified father, and her own heart ached. "Wait here," she said curtly. She found Silent Arrow in the barn. When she explained, he looked towards the main house where Ethan was asleep. "The boy's tracks will be old," he said. "Covered. The wind has moved the snow." "But you can try," Maeve insisted. "He's just a child." Silent Arrow nodded slowly. A few minutes later he emerged, clad in thick furs. And to everyone's surprise, 10-year-old Ethan was with him, bundled up, his expression serious and determined. "He will come," Silent Arrow stated, leaving no room for argument. "His eyes are sharp. He knows the ways of the snow." Maeve watched them ride out with Miller, two dark figures against a vast, moonlit sea of white. They rode to where the boy was last seen. While the posse had looked for obvious footprints, Silent Arrow and Ethan began to read the story the snow was telling. Silent Arrow pointed out how a drift had formed against a tree, indicating the wind's direction. It was Ethan, however, with his eyes closer to the ground, who found the first real clue: a faint, almost invisible depression near a rock. "Father," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "Something was here. The snow is different." Silent Arrow examined the spot and nodded. The boy had sheltered there. From that single, tiny clue, they unraveled a ghost of a trail that only they could see. For hours they moved through the frozen landscape, a silent ballet of observation and deduction. Finally, in a shallow ravine, sheltered by a fallen log, they found him. The Miller boy was huddled and blue with cold, but he was alive. When they rode back into Redemption, with the lost child wrapped in their furs, the town was silent. People emerged from their homes, their faces a mixture of disbelief and awe. Josiah Miller, tears freezing on his cheeks, took his son, his whispered "thank you" barely audible. He looked at Silent Arrow, then at Ethan, his eyes filled with a shame and a gratitude so profound it left him speechless. From that day on, something changed in Redemption. The hostility was replaced by a grudging, then genuine respect. The savage skills they had feared had saved one of their own. Silent Arrow was no longer just the widow's Apache. He was the man who found the Miller boy. And Ethan was no longer the half-breed. He was the tracker's son, a boy with a rare and powerful gift. The years continued to pass. Ethan grew into a tall, capable young man, a seamless fusion of his parents. He had Maeve's sharp mind for business and her iron will, tempered by his father's quiet patience and deep connection to the land. The bond between Maeve and Silent Arrow deepened into a silent, powerful partnership that needed no vows before a preacher. They ran the Lazy-O together, a blend of new ways and ancient wisdom. She was the mind and the fire. He was the eyes and the soul. One warm evening, Maeve, her hair now mostly silver, sat on the porch with Silent Arrow. They watched Ethan, now a man of 20, standing on a distant ridge, overseeing the evening roundup. He was a leader, respected and strong. "He is ready," Maeve said, her voice filled with a contentment she had spent a lifetime owning. "The ranch is safe. The legacy is secure." Silent Arrow reached over and took her hand. "Our legacy," he corrected her softly. "He carries the strength of the O'Connell name, but his spirit runs with the wisdom of the Apache. He is whole." Maeve looked at their joined hands, hers pale and marked by labor, his dark and etched with the story of a different life, and a deep peace settled over her. She had gambled everything for an heir and had won so much more. She had found a partner whose silence spoke louder than any man's words, and together they had created not just a son, but a future more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. The desperate seed she had planted in scandal and hope had grown into a mighty tree, its roots deep in the soil of two great peoples, its branches reaching for a sky that held no prejudice. The story of Maeve O'Connell and Silent Arrow is a legend whispered on the New Mexico winds, a tale of how the most desperate gambles can lead to the most unexpected treasures, and how a family can be forged
story of the untamed West and the even wilder human heart grabbed you? Then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of courage that will leave you breathless.